Imagine waking up one morning and discovering there's no more land anywhere on Earth. No cities, no mountains, no roads, no parks. Just one endless ocean stretching in every direction as far as the eye can see. You open your window and instead of grass or concrete, there's nothing but water. Deep, dark, and infinite. It sounds like science fiction, something out of a wild dream or disaster movie, but let's play with this scenario. What if it really happened? What if Earth suddenly became 100% water and 0% land? Would we adapt and survive, or would we face total extinction? At first, it might not even look that bad. A little more rain, rising tides, maybe some homes near the coast get flooded, and we think it's temporary. But then the water just doesn't stop. It keeps coming. Flood barriers fail. Rivers swell. Coastal cities vanish. And suddenly, it's not just the coast, it's entire continents drowning beneath an ocean that won't stop rising. The land we've lived on for thousands of years disappears. Entire countries turn into underwater relics. You'd look at the skyline one day and the next, you'd see waves crashing where buildings once stood. If this scenario played out over a short time, say just a few weeks or even days, it would throw the entire world into chaos. Humanity would be caught off guard, unable to react in time. Think of the domino effect. Transportation networks vanish, food production collapses, communications are crippled, and homes are lost. Billions of people would become homeless in an instant. Panic would spread. There'd be nowhere left to run because there's nowhere left above water. The entire population would be trapped on whatever boats, floating debris, or temporary rafts they could find. This isn't just a flood, it's an extinction-level reset. Now, Earth is already 70% covered by water. That's over 360 million square kilometers of ocean. But that remaining 30% of land? That's where we grow all our food, build our homes, and live our lives. Without it, everything changes. Ecosystems collapse. Plants can't grow in seawater. Animals that rely on land, which includes most mammals including us, would disappear. We can't drink salt water. We can't grow crops in it. We can't build homes on it. It's not just about space, it's about survival. That 30% landmass might seem small, but it's everything to human civilization. Let's talk numbers. Currently, 10% of Earth's land is covered in ice, glaciers and polar ice caps, mostly in Antarctica and Greenland. If all of that ice melted, sea levels would rise by about 70 meters. That's more than 230 feet. Just that alone would drown almost every major coastal city. But if you're talking about all land being submerged, that's a whole different level. We're now imagining an Earth where either land physically sinks or water levels rise impossibly high. Either way, we lose everything: farms, roads, airports, schools, hospitals, factories, gone in a flash. Civilization ends and a new aquatic world begins. The first few days would be terrifying. Think of the psychological shock. Waking up to find your street is now a canal. You step outside and there's no pavement, only waves. Your neighbors are floating away. There's no electricity. Your phone isn't working. Supermarkets are submerged. You'd have to fight for food, fresh water, dry clothes, even shelter. Those who didn't drown outright would be scrambling to survive on boats, rooftops, or anything that floats. Rescue operations would be overwhelmed. Governments would be paralyzed. People would panic. And nature wouldn't stop to help us catch our breath. And remember, no land also means no gravity anchors for our climate systems. The landmass plays a critical role in controlling weather. Mountains block storms, forests cool the air, and deserts create pressure systems that shape wind. Without land, Earth's weather would spin out of control. Hurricanes would rage endlessly, powered by the uninterrupted heat of the sun-warmed oceans. Waves could grow beyond 100 feet tall with nothing to slow them down. Ocean currents would shift drastically. The atmosphere would grow humid, unstable, and dangerous. It would rain nearly non-stop in some places, while others would face suffocating heat under the beating sun. You might wonder, could we adapt? Could humans build floating cities or learn to live on the sea like futuristic mariners? In theory, yes, but in reality, no. We simply wouldn't have the time. Floating cities are expensive, slow to build, and require years of engineering. Even in 2025, we're still in early stages of experimenting with sea-based living. A sudden shift to a water-only Earth wouldn't give us time to design, test, and deploy these systems. We'd need millions of boats, desalination machines, floating gardens, solar arrays, all ready to go instantly. That's not going to happen. We're too late the moment land disappears. Let's say some billionaires or governments somehow manage to get floating platforms operational. There'd be issues with stability, disease, overcrowding, and most importantly, resources. Where do you get your fresh water from? How do you grow food in the middle of the ocean? What happens when a storm hits? There are no ports, no refueling stations, no farms to restock from. Every problem would multiply fast. One broken water purifier or solar panel could mean death. Survival would become a daily gamble. Those who don't have access to tech would be forced to rely on primitive rafts or whatever they could find. And what about wildlife? Many people assume animals would be fine. After all, fish live in water, right? But even marine ecosystems rely on the land. Coral reefs need stable coastlines. Birds nest on cliffs and islands. Turtles lay eggs on beaches. Insects, reptiles, mammals, they'd all vanish. The food chain would be broken at every level. Even fish populations would start to crash. Overfishing, pollution, and lack of nutrients would throw ocean life into chaos. Entire species would go extinct. The ocean might look alive, but it would become a graveyard, beautiful on the surface but empty underneath. Let's jump into a tech question here. What about the internet? Would it survive? We actually got a great question from Mohammed Sabik Masoudi. Would Wi-Fi still work if the Earth was all water? The short answer is, yes, but barely. Wi-Fi is just radio waves, and they can still transmit over short distances above water. But they don't work well underwater, especially in salty ocean water, which blocks most signals. So if you're floating on a raft or boat, you might be able to use a satellite-based connection. But the entire fiber optic cable network we rely on, it's buried under land and sea floors. If the land disappears, so does the global web. No land also means no cell towers, no electrical grids, no data centers. We'd have to rebuild everything and keep it afloat. We'd need floating server farms powered by solar or nuclear energy, scattered across the oceans. It's possible in theory, but not at the scale required for the entire planet. Most people would lose access to the internet within days. Communication would collapse. People would have no way of contacting loved ones, no access to emergency broadcasts, no digital banking. The digital world we rely on would vanish along with the physical one. And we'd be left drifting in the dark, literally. Here's another question, and this one comes from our sponsor, Delete Me. They ask, would all this water at least wash your personal data off the internet? Sadly, the answer is a hard no. Just because the physical world is drowning doesn't mean your online presence disappears. Your name, email, phone number, purchase history, political views, that data still lives on servers, wherever they manage to survive. And in the wrong hands, that information can be used against you. In fact, in a lawless, desperate world, data could become even more dangerous, used for tracking, manipulation, or targeting vulnerable people. That's where Delete Me comes in. It's a service that hunts down your personal data across shady data broker sites, removes it, and keeps monitoring in case it pops up again. I've used it myself, and trust me, you'd be shocked at how many places your info lives online. Over 700 pieces of data were found on me, and 24 data broker sites had my full profile. Creepy? Yes. Preventable? Also yes. With Delete Me, you can wipe that info out before it's too late. It's like getting a second chance at privacy before the digital flood hits, even if the real one already has. If you want to protect yourself and your family, go to joindelteam.com/whatif and use promo code WHATIF for 20% off. It's one of the few things that can still protect you when the world, both physical and digital, is falling apart. Now, with that survival tip out of the way, let's dive back into our watery nightmare. Because by day 5, things get even worse. Not just socially but biologically. Humans aren't built to live on water. Our bodies, our lungs, our skin, we're land animals. And without land, our species begins to break down fast. There are over 1 million underwater volcanoes hidden deep beneath the surface of our oceans. These silent giants lie dormant in the darkness, waiting, their power concealed under kilometers of water. While most people worry about surface threats like hurricanes or earthquakes, these underwater volcanoes pose a far more catastrophic danger. If something were to trigger them, like the sudden chain reaction from land-based disasters, their fury could be unleashed in an instant. A global heat wave melting glaciers rapidly could create tectonic instability, waking these underwater monsters from their slumber and pushing Earth into its next great cataclysm. Now imagine this nightmare turning into reality. Suddenly, in the worst-case scenario, every underwater volcano on the planet begins erupting at the same time. We're talking about synchronized eruptions from the Pacific Ocean to the Indian, from the Atlantic to the Arctic. The scale of such destruction would be beyond anything humanity has ever faced. These eruptions would trigger devastating magnitude 8 earthquakes across every continent. Ground shaking, buildings collapsing, cities torn apart, all happening simultaneously. Skyscrapers would fall like dominoes, burying millions of people beneath twisted steel and crumbling concrete in mere minutes. But the lava isn't the only danger. When underwater volcanoes erupt, they don't just spew out molten magma. They also release water that has been trapped in Earth's mantle for millions of years. Scientists believe the mantle holds more than double the amount of water than all of Earth's oceans combined. This hidden reservoir, when suddenly released, would pour into our seas, adding to the rapidly rising sea levels. It wouldn't be just ice melt we'd need to worry about anymore. This deep Earth water would turn an already flooding planet into a drowning one. By day 6, just as people might think the worst is over, a second wave of terror would begin. Before humanity could recover from the initial earthquakes and surging floods, massive tsunamis would form and sweep across the already devastated continents. These aren't just waves, they are walls of water traveling at speeds up to 50 kilometers per hour, 30 miles per hour, on land. And unless you're literally as fast as Usain Bolt, there's no escaping them. As people flee in panic, evacuation zones would turn into death traps. Thousands would be trampled before even catching sight of the oncoming tsunami. As the towering tsunamis tear through everything in their path, the water released from the mantle continues to rise. Every second counts as coastal cities vanish underwater and entire regions become submerged. By day 7, Earth would be nearly unrecognizable. Sea levels would have risen by over 3.3 kilometers. That's more than 2 miles of water covering the surface. All continents would now be underwater. Only the highest mountain peaks would remain above sea level, and those would be few and far between. Earth would transform into a true water world, a planet of endless ocean. 1 month after the catastrophe, or day 30, whatever is left of national governments would attempt to regroup. In desperate attempts to maintain order, martial law would be declared globally. The few mountain peaks that still poked out above the water would become safe zones, the last bits of dry land left. Civilians would fight for space and resources in these tiny refuges. People would build rafts, hoard supplies, and cling to whatever hope they could find. Meanwhile, global leaders would start formulating long-term survival strategies. Top of the list, building underwater living units for the future of humanity. Of course, building entire underwater habitats wouldn't happen overnight. These structures would require advanced engineering, cooperation among nations, and time, something humanity now has very little of. Still, work would begin on these aquatic settlements, designed to serve as the last refuge for civilization. And by day 60, Earth's transformation into a full-fledged water world would be complete. All forests, grasslands, and deserts, everything that once made our planet habitable, would be lost. Plants requiring soil to grow would die, and with them, land animals that depended on vegetation. This would lead to a swift, global extinction event. The mass extinction wouldn't stop at land animals. Marine life, which you might expect to flourish in a water-dominated world, would also face its own apocalypse. As Earth heats up and ocean water evaporates, the air would fill with excess carbon dioxide. Oceans would absorb that CO2, becoming more acidic over time. This would create toxic conditions for marine ecosystems. Shell-building organisms like clams, corals, and plankton would die off first, collapsing the food chain. Without these base-level species, even the mighty whales would struggle to survive. The oceans, ironically, would become graveyards instead of sanctuaries. Earth has wiped out life before. In fact, it has done so 5 times in the past through mass extinction events. Each of these events reshaped the biosphere and gave birth to new forms of life. The first major extinction occurred around 445 million years ago during the Ordovician period. Most of life back then lived in the oceans. Sudden climate shifts disrupted oxygen levels, collapsing marine ecosystems and wiping out 85% of all species. Since then, Earth has continued this cycle of creation and destruction. The most famous mass extinction? The one that ended the age of dinosaurs 66 million years ago. That particular extinction, known as the Cretaceous-Paleogene event, was triggered by a massive asteroid strike. It darkened the skies, halted photosynthesis, cooled the planet, and killed the dinosaurs along with 75% of all life. Today, however, our extinction would come from within, from Earth's own melting glaciers, erupting volcanoes, and rising oceans. Fast forward 2 years after the first melting began, we're now on day 765. By this time, up to 90% of all species on Earth would be gone. Human survivors would be few, and most would live not by laws, but by looting and desperation. Floating communities would be formed from whatever remained: abandoned boats, makeshift rafts, or salvaged cruise ships. The wealthiest and most powerful would retreat into the underwater units, living relatively secure lives with desalinated water, pumped in oxygen, and some level of sustainability. Meanwhile, those left above would take over luxury yachts and large barges, converting them into survival colonies. People would collect rainwater, boil seawater, and do anything to survive. But it wouldn't be enough. Most ships would soon run out of fuel. They would be left adrift, floating helplessly in an ocean filled with uncertainty. Survivors on these floating colonies would attempt to organize and trade. Some would form small economies, creating systems of barter, protection, and cooperation. Others would descend into violence and chaos. Disease would spread quickly in cramped conditions with no access to medicine. Quarantine zones would be brutal, often abandoning the sick to prevent outbreaks. With no land to grow food, malnutrition would become widespread. Though some communities would manage to farm fast-growing algae, this food wouldn't be enough for everyone. Life on this new ocean planet would be short, harsh, and filled with endless challenges. Eventually, the ocean's wrath would show its true force. With no land to disrupt weather systems, storms would grow stronger and more frequent. Cyclones would form and rage across the globe, smashing through floating communities. There would be nowhere to hide. The constant evaporation would also make the air unbearably humid and hot. Breathing would be harder. Every day would feel like a steam bath. Still, amid all this chaos, a handful of groups would continue fighting for survival. With so few people left, these small colonies would become humanity's last hope, a fragile flicker in a world drowned by disaster. Jump ahead to year 200. At this point, it's grim. Realistically, the total loss of all land would result in the near-complete extinction of humans. Maybe a few 100,000 people would remain, if they were lucky. The Earth, once home to over 8 billion, would now hold a scattered few, living on algae farms or drifting barges. In even the most optimistic view, maybe 10 million people could survive in small, floating communities. But humanity's story wouldn't be over just yet. Evolution doesn't stop, even in disaster. Some humans might slowly begin to adapt to the new aquatic life. We've already seen signs of this. The Bajo people of Indonesia, known as sea nomads, have adapted to life underwater. They have spleens 50% larger than average, allowing them to store more oxygen and dive deeper for longer. They can stay underwater for over 13 minutes and dive as deep as 70 meters, 230 feet. The Monkan people in Thailand have developed the ability to see clearly underwater. These adaptations show what humans are capable of, given time. But unfortunately, time is the one thing we don't have in this new world. Evolution takes generations and we're running out of them fast. Even with enhanced spleens and underwater vision, the human population would be too small and too scattered to repopulate effectively. Infant mortality would skyrocket due to poor nutrition and lack of healthcare. And eventually humanity's dark side, our tendency toward violence, would finish the job. Raids, wars, and desperation would wipe out even more survivors. In the end, our return to the sea wouldn't be a triumphant homecoming, it would be our undoing. We evolved for life on land, not beneath the waves. And even though Earth came from the ocean, it seems we were never meant to go back. Now, realistically, it's unlikely that every ice cap will melt or every underwater volcano will erupt all at once. This is a worst-case scenario. But it's important to remember, it is happening slowly. Just 20,000 years ago, sea levels were 120 meters lower than today. The glaciers are melting. The water is rising. It won't take 1,000 years, maybe 5,000, maybe less. Maybe we should start planning now. Not just to adapt, but to escape. Maybe it's time to think about a planet-wide evacuation. A new home. A new Earth. But that's a story for another time.